This is World Insight, and I'm Tian. Architecture is not only about shelter or only about a very simple enclosure. It should be able to excite you, to calm you, to make you think. Those are the words of wisdom coming from Zaha Hadid, the first woman to receive the Pritzker Architecture Prize, considered the premier award in the field. The Pritzker family funds the prize, which celebrates architectural talent, vision, and commitment, irrespective of nationality and race. I got a chance to catch up with one of the Pritzkers, Thomas, an American billionaire who runs the Pritzker organization. He tells us about the wonders of cultural diversity in architecture and why the prize embraces the avant-garde and some of the most interesting thoughts in the world.
I think you point out something that's important, and that is to think about these architects in the context of the moment that they were working.
Absolutely.
And what happens if we take someone like Robert, today we sort of take it for granted. We've seen enough of the results that it doesn't look like anything special, and yet he was breaking eggs in his time, and it's important to judge him from the moment when he made his impression.
That's right.
But he's fortunate enough to be in a field where that will have a living legacy. If I go to Zaha, who was a close friend, and if I look at what Zaha did, for sure, both by her architecture and her personality, she was happy to break eggs. The more eggs she could break, the happier she was.
Absolutely.
And she did it with the way she dressed, the way she presented herself, and her architecture. And yet, it's going to be important that Zaha, the fact that Zaha existed, will remain important to society for many years after Zaha's contribution.
She's quite a personality and quite a woman. But when you think about both Robert and Zaha, the controversies they created at the very beginning when they were being seen as the new voices, that really shows us the importance of inclusiveness of a society in a way. But Ms. Pritzker, the question is our society these days, wherever you go, as open as theirs?
You're not going to have innovation and take no risk.
Yeah.
And so what we need to think is, how do we take risks, allow innovation, and then manage the breakage? How do we encourage that architect, in this case, to take some risk, but not destroy his whole career if it turns out he's going down a dead end?
Earlier you talked about the new generation.
Yep.
What about the new generation?
Like the millennials in every discipline, I'm totally jealous of the new generation.
Yes.
They are going to grow up as digital natives.
Who knows whether it's a blessing or not?
It's going to be both. For sure it's going to be both.
Absolutely.
But for the architecture world, it means that they think more creatively, they think more expansively. For them, technology is natural, because you're now more easily able to translate from a creative brain into an actual building.
You certainly have new voices. You got architects coming from China, from India, emerging economies, developing countries, all become members of those recipients of your award.
Yes.
But at the same time, technology is developing. So you got diversity of countries, ethnic backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, and also probably diversity of how technologies worked into the architecture.
I want to say 10 or 15 years ago, in order to manage that, it used to be the jury got together for a day in January, looked through slides, made a decision, and that's how the decision was made. We've now implemented what we call a fly around. I think they may be doing it right now as we're talking.
Right. Where are they now?
The jury, this year they're in Europe.
I see.
And the jury spends a week together looking at architecture. And the purpose isn't so much to look at architects who may win the prize. it's to look at great architecture and work together, socialize together, have an experience together, and begin talking.
Get that chemistry going.
Get the chemistry going. And also, it allows us to expand their horizons and deal with exactly what you're describing. The diversity in today's world is so huge that it's less manageable than it was in the old days.
Right. Thomas Pritzker, talking about the Pritzker Prize. History is rich with inspirations, and in this part of the world, one of the richest traditions is the ancient Silk Road, which linked China and the West thousands of years ago. The melting pot of cultures sparked the brilliant exchange of ideas and a sense of community among many nationalities way before the advent of modern globalization. The history is not lost on Thomas Pritzker either. He and his family had taken journeys exploring the mosaic cultures in Tibet and other parts of Western China with fierce passion in search of inspiration. I have to go to the other side of your life, Mr. Pritzker. You yourself has a strong interest in history, the 11th century history related to the area of Tibet. And I know you and your friends and colleagues have been doing research on the side many times about that. What have you discovered?
This 11th century kingdom that we study, it's primarily my wife, myself, and now our youngest son. And the three of us have been a team now for a number of years. And it was an amazing society.
A family studying a kingdom.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And this king must have been a fascinating person with deep wisdom, because he was king, but he actually promulgated laws. If you go back into ancient history, it made no sense for a king to promulgate laws. He wanted to make whatever laws he wanted to make that day. But this king said, no, I need a framework for my society to thrive, and so I'm going to create that framework for them. He then had a lot of wealth. He had discovered gold. In old days, what you did if you had wealth is you had a big army.
Right.
And that's how you got power. He didn't do that. What he did was he used that to import ideas, and he imported Buddhism and actually used that to create a different society rather than using military means. So when I think about this guy and try and put myself in his shoes, he was a fantastic, brilliant guy. He's one of the guys I would like to have most met in history. He lived from like the 950s until maybe 1025.
Right.
We're not sure of the exact beginning and end date, but in that period of time.
It's not just Tibet, but I know that you have been enjoying yourself for quite some time about the ancient Silk Road and all the very important towns and places along the ancient Silk Road. In Xinjiang, for example, in Gansu, where you were, with the grottos over there. So how do you look at the brilliant history, actually, human being has managed to create?
Yes, we can, as long as we learn from the history. We can't ignore the lessons of history. So we just went, as you said, we went to Tajikistan, Xinjiang, we went to Qinghai, then Gansu to Dunhuang.
Yeah.
And what you saw was people were traveling and exchanging ideas 1,000 years ago. If you went to Chang'an, Xi'an,
Yes.
in the 8th century, you would have met people from the Iranian plateau, you would have met Chinese, you would have met Jewish people, you would have met Indian people, you would have met all these people in the marketplace.
That's right.
And you would have been picking up their ideas and saying, that idea doesn't work for me, But this one is one I really ought to be thinking about.
And they felt very natural at the time with one another.
Yes.
Comfortable.
Very comfortable.
Whether it's culture or language or the goods exchanges
Yeah.
and the way they interact with one another.
Yes, mostly. Not 100%, but mostly. And so that's why I say we want to learn from that. The idea of globalization is not 30 years old.
We didn't create it.
It's 1,000 years old. And it's one of the wonderful things about the Silk Road is you then see it as living history. And I think it is part of our human DNA. Our natural DNA is to be curious. Our natural DNA is to want to meet someone from a different society and learn from them and figure out what they're like.
And respect and being respected.
And yes, mutual respect is critical to life.
Dunhuang Grottos is one of the most well-known places when it comes to how ancient Silk Road has functioned. You see so many different caves in which sculptures and also very important handing down of arts coming from all the way Tang and the way up. But you do see whether a society, when it's open or not, the level of art is very different with one another.
Yeah.
You see the height of Sui and the Tang dynasty, but you also see when the door is closed in China, the art level of the caves going down very dramatically. For example, of the Qing dynasty. Many onlookers, visitors to the Dunhuang Grottos, not only took back what they saw, but also a lot of thoughts about, where China should be, how we should be like compared to our ancestors, and how the world should be interacting with China.
Earlier you talked about mutual respect. I think if you add mutual respect and curiosity, you then have where progress comes from. I actually think it's benefiting me to respect you because it opens the door to be able to learn.
It's not just the ancient Silk Road, but rather now people are thinking about how should we interact in a modern way, but also along the Silk Road and probably beyond. But the question is, while we are doing economic development, whether we have been involving the elements of cultural research, the curiosity about history, what others have created 1,000 years ago, have we really learned along the process?
I think the answer is yes and no. We've learned, but we've also failed to learn in some areas.
Explain, please.
So how can I best explain? Okay, I can use Hyatt as an example. We built the Hyatt Regency O'Hare, and we put a desk over here, and we put a light on top of the desk from the ceiling, and we didn't put an electrical outlet on top. So we had to rework the whole room to bring the electricity. Okay, all right. We then built a hotel in Dallas. We copied the room, and we copied the mistake. And the same mistake, we made it twice. So that's an example of, are we thinking on our feet and saying, what can we go back and learn? I'm quite optimistic. I don't think society is failing to learn from history. I think we could do a better job of it, but you can always do a better job. I think that as long as we keep the barriers low between different disciplines. If you're a historian, there should be a low barrier in talking to the businessman. If you're a businessman, there should be a low barrier in talking to the architect.
Right.
And if we keep those barriers low so that our learning is across different disciplines, that will be very beneficial. So that to me is one of the challenges, is keeping barriers down and keeping 360-degree vision in our minds.
Sounds like a fascinating job. Thank you so much, Mr. Pritzker. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thomas Pritzker, talking about cultural diversity and the charm of architecture. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.